When my son told me the house was no longer mine, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't even ask why. I just smiled. I remember how strange that felt. My heart was shaking inside my chest, but my face stayed calm. I stood there in my own kitchen, holding a cup of cold tea, listening to the words fall from his mouth like they meant nothing. "This house belongs to me now," he said. "You need to understand that." The walls around us felt smaller. The clock on the wall kept ticking, loud and slow. Each second felt like it was pressing against my chest. That house was not just bricks and wood. It was where I raised him, where I stayed up all night when he was sick, where I cooked his favorite meals and waited by the door when he came home late. And now he was telling me it was not mine. I wanted to ask him when I stopped belonging there. I wanted to ask when I became a guest in my own life. But I didn't say anything. I smiled, because sometimes smiling is the only way to stop yourself from breaking. What my son didn't know was this: I had already spoken to someone who knew the truth, someone who knew the law, and when that person finally spoke, everything changed. Before I go on, let me take a moment to speak to you directly. Hello, my dear friends. Thank you for sitting with me today. Thank you for listening to my story. If you are new here, welcome. And if you have been here before, thank you for coming back. This channel is a place where stories are shared slowly, gently, and honestly. Here, we talk about family, about love, about mistakes, about silence, and about the strength that comes when we least expect it. If my story touches your heart, even a little, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find stories like mine. And if you believe stories can heal, please subscribe. Every week, there is another voice, another life, another lesson quietly waiting to be heard. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I was never a woman with big dreams. I did not dream of traveling the world or owning expensive things. My dreams were small, simple, and close to home. I wanted a peaceful life, a warm house, a family that felt safe. When my son was born, all my dreams folded into one shape. Him, his father, and I were young when we married. We did not have much money, but we had plans. We believed love could carry us through anything. Then life did what life often does. It changed suddenly. My husband passed away when our son was still very young. One day, he was there. The next day, he was gone. I still remember standing in the hospital hallway, holding my son's small hand. He was too young to understand why his father was not coming home. I was old enough to understand everything. From that day on, it was just the two of us. I became mother and father, teacher and protector, provider and comfort. I worked long hours. Some days I was tired beyond words. But every evening, when I opened the front door and heard my son's voice, it felt worth it. The house we lived in back then was small and old, but it was full of life. It smelled like cooked food and clean laundry. It echoed with footsteps and laughter. I saved money slowly, not for myself, for stability. When I finally bought the house we live in now, it felt like an achievement carved out of years of patience. I signed the papers with shaking hands, not because I was scared, but because I was proud. This is ours, I told my son that day. A place no one can take from us. He nodded. He was still young then. He trusted me completely. As years passed, my son grew taller, quieter, more distant in small ways I didn't want to notice. That is how motherhood works sometimes. You notice changes, but you explain them away. You tell yourself it is normal. He went to school, then college, then work. I stayed the same, still waking early, still cooking, still waiting. When he told me he was getting married, I felt mixed emotions. Joy, of course, and fear. I wanted him to be happy, but I also knew my life was about to change again. The day I met his future wife, I tried my best to be welcoming. I smiled. I asked questions. I listened more than I spoke. She was polite, but distant, not unkind, just careful. After the wedding, they moved into the house with me. At least, that was the plan. 81st. Everything felt fine. We shared meals. We shared space. I tried not to interfere. I told myself, this is their life now. Step back. So I did. I stopped giving advice unless asked. I stayed quiet during disagreements. I adjusted my routines to avoid being in the way. Slowly, the house began to feel different. Not colder, just unfamiliar. Rooms I once moved through freely now felt like someone else's territory. Conversations stopped when I entered. Decisions were made without me. Still, I told myself this was normal. Children grow up. Mothers must learn to step aside. I reminded myself every day that love is patient. That love does not demand attention, but there were moments, small ones, quiet ones, moments when I felt like a visitor in my own home. My son no longer asked me about my day. He no longer shared his worries. Our conversations became short and practical. Did you eat? I'll be late. Don't wait up. His wife managed most things now. Bills, repairs, schedules. I was relieved at first. It felt like help, but slowly, I noticed something else. I was no longer included. Mail began arriving in his name only. Documents were placed on the table for signatures, always rushed. Just routine stuff, he would say. Nothing important. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? After all, this was the boy I raised, the boy I protected, the boy whose childhood scraped knees I cleaned with my own hands. I never imagined he could hurt me, not intentionally, and even if something felt strange, I pushed the feeling away. Because mothers often choose peace over questions, I still cooked, still cleaned, still kept the house warm, but I felt smaller inside it. There were days I sat alone, in the living room, listening to the ticking clock, wondering when exactly my place had shifted, not disappeared, just moved. I didn't feel angry. I felt confused, and deep inside, there was a quiet sadness I did not yet have words for. At night, I lay in bed thinking about the past, about promises made without words, about the house I once believed would always be mine. I told myself I was imagining things. That age makes people sensitive, that I should be grateful I had a roof and family. So I stayed quiet. I didn't know then that silence would soon cost me more than words ever could. The changes did not arrive all at once. They came quietly, so quietly that I almost missed them. At first, it was little things, things easy to ignore, things easy to forgive. I noticed that my son and his wife began whispering more often. Not secretive, just lowered voices, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I told myself they were being polite, that they wanted privacy, that young couples need space. So I respected it. I spent more time in my room. I watched television with the volume low. I folded laundry slowly, just to give them time alone. I believed that stepping back was the right thing to do. But the house began to feel different. The kitchen, once my favorite place, no longer felt like mine. New rules appeared without being spoken. The cabinets were reorganized. My cups moved. My spices placed somewhere I could not easily reach. One evening, I cooked dinner as I always had. Nothing special, just a simple meal. My daughter-in-law tasted it and smiled politely. We're trying a different diet now, she said gently. You don't have to cook every day. Her words were kind, but they landed heavy. Cooking was how I showed love, how I felt useful, how I stayed connected. I nodded and said nothing. From that day on, I cooked less, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want to feel in the way. Soon after, I noticed the bills were no longer left on the table. I used to pay them myself. Electricity, water, property tax. Now they were handled quietly, behind closed doors. When I asked once, my son smiled and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it." His tone was calm, reassuring. Still, something inside me tightened. I began to feel like a guest who had stayed too long. Not unwanted, just unnecessary. The first time I truly felt hurt was over something small. I received a letter from the bank. It had my name on it, but it had already been opened. I held it in my hands for a long time before saying anything. At dinner, I mentioned it softly. "This letter came for me," I said. "It was already opened." My son looked surprised. "Oh," he said. "I thought it was another bank notice. I didn't realize." He said it so easily, so casually. I nodded again, because I didn't want to argue over a piece of paper. But that night, I lay awake, thinking about privacy, thinking about boundaries, thinking about how quickly small lines can disappear. A few weeks later, my son brought me some documents. "Can you sign these?" he asked. I looked at the pages. There were many words, small letters, legal language I did not fully understand. "What are these?" I asked. "Just routine stuff," he said. "Insurance, property updates, nothing to worry about." He was standing. I was sitting. I felt rushed. I trusted him, so I signed. After that, the atmosphere shifted again. Keys were changed. Not all of them, just one. I noticed my old spare key no longer worked on the back door. When I mentioned it, my daughter-in-law laughed lightly. "Oh, we had some locks updated," she said. "For safety, safety." That word stayed with me. Safety from what? From whom? Still, I said nothing. I began keeping my belongings in my room. Important papers, photos, small personal things. Not because I was afraid, but because I felt unsure. I noticed my name slowly disappearing. The house internet account was now under my son's name. The phone plan changed. Even the trash collection bill, each change alone meant nothing. Together, they felt like a quiet erasing. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation. I was walking past the living room when I heard my name. "She won't need to know," my son said. There was a pause. "She trusts us." His wife replied. My heart stopped for a moment. I stood still, holding my breath, afraid of being heard. They didn't notice me. I walked back to my room slowly and closed the door. I sat on the bed and stared at the wall. I tried to tell myself I misunderstood, that I was being sensitive. That age can play tricks on the mind, but a feeling had settled inside me. Heavy, uncomfortable. From that day on, I paid closer attention. Not suspiciously, just carefully. I noticed that decisions about the house were made without me. Repairs scheduled, furniture moved, rooms discussed. I was informed after the fact. One evening, my son mentioned renovations. "We might change the guest room," he said. "The guest room?" I repeated. He looked confused. "Yes, the small bedroom." "That was my room." I swallowed. "Oh," I said. "That room?" He nodded, as if it was settled. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, not because of the room, but because of the word guest. Weeks later, the moment came that shifted everything. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I once helped him with homework. My son cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, "there's something we need to talk about." His voice was calm, too calm. My daughter-in-law stood near the counter. Arms crossed, he continued. "The house," he said, "it's under my name now." I stared at him. "What do you mean?" I asked. He avoided my eyes. "You signed the papers," he said, "a while ago." I felt dizzy. "No," I said softly. "This is my house." He sighed. "Mom," he said, "you don't need to worry about ownership anymore." The words landed hard. "So, I don't own it?" I asked. He finally looked at me. "No," he said, "you don't." The room went silent. I felt something crack inside me. Not loudly, quietly. Years of trust, years of sacrifice, years of love, all reduced to a sentence. "You should understand," he added. "This is better for everyone." Better. For who? I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how this happened, when it happened, but my voice stayed calm. I smiled. "I understand," I said, but inside, I knew something was very wrong. That night, I did not sleep at all. I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the door frames. I remembered painting them, fixing them, paying for them. I remembered telling my son this house would always be his home. I never imagined he would one day tell me it wasn't mine. By morning, my sadness had turned into clarity. I did not want revenge. I did not want control. I wanted the truth. And that was the moment I decided to speak to a lawyer. The morning after my son told me the house was no longer mine, I woke up before sunrise. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of a house that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Nothing looked different. The walls were the same. The floors still creaked in the same places, and yet something fundamental had changed. I did not rush out of bed. I did not confront anyone. I simply sat there, letting the truth settle inside me. For many years, I had believed that silence kept peace, that asking questions would only cause pain. But now I understood something clearly. Silence had not protected me. It had slowly erased me. I got dressed and made myself a cup of tea. My hands trembled slightly, but my mind felt steady. I knew what I needed to do. I told my son I would be out for a few hours. I did not explain where I was going. He did not ask. The lawyer's office was small and quiet. It smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. The walls were lined with books that looked heavy with rules and words I did not understand. I sat across from the lawyer and told my story slowly. From the beginning, from the house, from the papers. He listened without interrupting. He nodded. Sometimes, he took notes. When I finished, he asked to see the documents I had signed. I handed them over with shaking hands. He read carefully, page by page, line by line. The room was silent except for the sound of paper turning. Finally, he looked up at me. Did anyone explain these documents to you before you signed? He asked gently. No, I said. I trusted my son. He nodded. That trust matters, he said. He pointed to a section of the document. This signature does not transfer ownership, he explained, and this one requires independent advice, which you did not receive. I felt my breath catch. So, the house? I asked. He looked at me calmly. The house is still legally yours, he said. For a moment, I could not speak. I felt relief. Yes, but I also felt something else. A deep sadness, because I had needed a stranger to protect what my own child had tried to take. The lawyer explained everything slowly. In simple words, he did not rush. He told me that the documents were misleading, that they created the appearance of control, but not real ownership, that my son had no legal right to claim the house as his. I listened quietly. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. Before I left, the lawyer asked me what I wanted to do next. I don't want to fight, I said. I just want the truth to be clear. He nodded. Then we will speak calmly, he said, and firmly. A few days later, he came to the house with me. My son and his wife were sitting in the living room. They looked surprised to see him. This is my lawyer, I said quietly. The lawyer introduced himself politely and sat down. No one raised their voice. No one accused anyone. The lawyer simply spoke. He explained the law. He explained the documents. He explained the facts. This house, he said, belongs to your mother. Silence filled the room. My son's face changed. Not anger, shock. He looked at me. You told me you signed everything, he said. I trusted you. I replied softly. The room felt heavy. The lawyer continued. Any changes to ownership require clear consent and independent advice, he said. That did not happen here. My daughter-in-law said nothing. She stared at the floor. My son ran his hands through his hair. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said quietly. I believed him, in a way, but intention does not erase impact. The lawyer stood up. If you have further questions, you can contact my office, he said. For now, the legal position is clear. When he left, the house felt very still. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, my son looked at me again. I thought this was best, he said, for everyone. I nodded slowly. Best for who? I asked. He didn't answer. That night, I sat alone in the living room. I looked at old photographs. My son as a child, his father smiling beside him. I felt grief, not for the house, for the trust that had been broken. The next day, my son came to my room. He knocked. That alone felt new. Can we talk? He asked. I nodded. He sat on the edge of the bed like a boy again. I was afraid, he said. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of the future. I listened. I thought if everything was under my name, it would be simpler, he said. Did you think About me? I asked gently. He looked down. I didn't think enough, he said. That answer stayed with me. The turning point was not the lawyer's words. It was that moment. The moment my son realized I was not just part of the house. I was a person. After the lawyer left, the house felt different again. Not lighter, not heavier, just honest. There were no raised voices that day, no dramatic words, just a long silence that said more than any argument could. For the first time in a long while, I did not rush to fill that silence. I let it sit. I realized then how often I had tried to smooth things over, how often I had swallowed my feelings just to keep peace, how often I had made myself smaller so others could feel comfortable. That evening, I made tea for myself only. I did not ask if anyone else wanted any. It felt strange, but also necessary. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the steam rise from the cup. My hands were steady now. My thoughts were clearer. The house was still mine, but more importantly, my life was still mine. Over the next few days, my son tried to be kind. He spoke more gently. He asked before making decisions, but something between us had shifted. Trust, once broken, does not return quickly. It walks back slowly, step by step, if at all. One evening, my son sat across from me again. "I'm sorry," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. "I never meant to hurt you," he added. I believed him, but I also understood something new. Good intentions do not protect people from harm. Only honesty does. "I know," I said, "but that doesn't change what happened." He nodded. "I was wrong," he said. Those words mattered. Not because they fixed everything, but because they acknowledged the truth. We talked that night. Really talked. Not about documents or ownership, but about fear, about pressure, about control. He told me he felt overwhelmed by responsibility, by expectations. "I thought if I handled everything, it would be easier," he said. "For you or for yourself?" I asked gently. He paused. "For me." He admitted that honesty hurt, but it also healed, because for the first time, he saw me not as a burden or a problem to manage, but as a person with feelings. Over time, we made changes, not dramatic ones, quiet ones. My mail returned to my hands. My name was placed back on accounts. Decisions were discussed, not announced. I did not demand these things. I simply stopped staying silent. That was the biggest change of all. I learned how to speak calmly without apologizing for existing, how to say no without guilt, how to say yes without fear. My daughter-in-law remained distant for a while. She was polite, but reserved. I did not push. Some bridges take time to rebuild. Some never fully do, but I noticed something else. She stopped treating me like someone temporary. She stopped making plans without mentioning them. She began to ask, not because she had to, but because the balance had changed. I had reclaimed my place, not as the owner of the house, but as its foundation. One afternoon, I walked through the room slowly, touching the walls again, but this time without sadness. I realized I had been grieving long before the conflict ever became clear. Grieving the slow loss of respect, the quiet disappearance of my role. Now, that grief softened. I was no longer afraid of being alone in my own home. I was no longer afraid of speaking. That peace came at a cost, but it was worth it. Weeks later, my son asked if we could sit together again. "I want us to move forward," he said. "So do I replied, "but things cannot go back to how they were." He nodded. "I know," he said. That was enough. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means choosing not to live in bitterness. I forgave him, not in a single moment, but gradually. Each honest conversation helped. Each small act of respect helped. Some nights, I still feel the ache. The memory of being told the house was not mine. The shock of realizing how close I came to losing more than property. But I do not let that memory harden me. Instead, I let it remind me that even mothers need boundaries. That love should not require silence. That strength can be gentle. Today, the house feels like a home again. Not because nothing went wrong, but because something was finally made right. I still cook. I still clean. But now, I also rest. I take walks. I read. I sit in the sunlight without feeling guilty. I no longer wait to be invited into my own life. My relationship with my son is different now. More honest, less idealized. And that is okay. Because real love is not perfect. It is truthful. Sometimes I think about how easily this could have gone differently. How silence could have cost me everything. How fear could have kept me quiet forever. But I spoke, softly, firmly, and that made all the difference.